Oklahoma. He's also the chair of the House Republican Policy Committee. Thanks so much for being here. We appreciate it. So you heard Sperling's comments. He's not really saying the president would rather default than to sing about, question, really.
No, I understand that, but the president's also come back over and over again and said he doesn't want to negotiate, doesn't want to talk about this. This is one of those moments in our history that every time we come up against a large increase in our debt ceiling, we should actually talk about how do we stop doing this? What do we have to do to get us back in balance? It's as if any business would get to a spot and say, you know what, we're going into debt here. Let's see what we have to do to fix it.
I don't disagree with the notion that this is a decent time to deal with our nation's debt, but the threat of default, I think, is what alarms so many people, and we're going to hear from Tim Pawlenty, former Republican governor of Minnesota, in a minute, who's going to say the same thing. That's what scares people, because this isn't, Al Gore put it very crassly, but he said that you guys sound like you're saying, nice global economy you have here, it'd be a shame if anything happened to it. This isn't yours to negotiate with.
No, it's not. And that's not all what we're trying to say. And I think the speaker's been pretty clear over and over again.
You won't default.
We don't want default.
You don't want to, or you won't?
We don't want any kind of default. We don't want to have to get to that speed. We have to get to a spot and to a short term. We have to sit down and do a short term. But the problem is that all this conversation to say we won't negotiate, we won't plan, we won't strategize. We want to sit down with the president and with the Senate and say, what do we have to do to resolve an economy that we no longer have to do these large debt ceiling increases? How do we start getting us back on a pattern?
But here's a question I have for you. You see the poll numbers. You guys, everyone's taking a hit, but Republicans are really taking a hit. What is it, a 17-seat majority? It's not
17 seats.
17 seats, okay?
Right.
Are you not worried that you're actually going to put your party in a worse position, and ultimately the Democrats are going to recapture the House, and then where are you going to be?
We're in the same spot, though. Take this fast forward a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, when we get into really critical debt ceiling issues, and we have to ask the simple question. When people say, what did you do to defend us? And if we say, well, we did nothing, we just continue to raise it year after year and never tried to stand in the way, never tried to fix it, they would hold us to account then. We're trying to look at this. What's interesting is that there's this whole guessing game. How far along are we? How bad is it? It's kind of like playing a football game. You're 21 points behind in a football game, but you can't decide if you're in the first quarter or in the last 2 minutes. Well, a lot of Republicans feel like, you know what, we're really getting a critical moment here. We're over 100% of debt to GDP right now. In our debt, we continue to accelerate in our deficits here. We've got to find some way to actually solve this and stabilize it. So if we feel like this is a critical moment, we need to resolve it. But yet there's some Democrats say, keep going. This is not an issue. This is not a problem. Harry Reid saying, what was that, a year ago, when he said, I'm not going to talk about Social Security for another 2 decades. This is not a problem for 2 decades. We look at it and say, it's better to solve it now and to have a longer window to be able to resolve it than it is to wait till then.
Absolutely. But there was this grand bargain when President Obama and House Speaker Boehner were talking, and I think there was a question. You can talk about who walked away from the table first.
Right.
But I think there was a question about whether or not House Speaker Boehner would be able to deliver any sizable part of his caucus for any deal that included raising taxes at all, which is what President Obama needs to sell Democrats. And if you guys have that completely off the table, then how is there ever going to be a deal?
Well, if you look back in last December up to January the 2nd, when the fiscal cliff deal was resolved, there was a big tax increase that was done in that. We look at that and say, there's the president's tax increase that he asked for. That's done. It's solidified that. We've still got to deal with a lot of other cuts. And this is not some kind of draconian, fast pace, let's cut everything now. We've got to look long term at all the entitlements and the way that we handle things. If we can't resolve a long frame window, like was done with Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan when they looked 30 years out to try to stabilize Social Security, if we can't do that, we're not going to be able to fix it a week out. We're right now in Social Security disability. We're 2.5 years from being insolvent right now from Social Security disability, and we're still nipping around the edges when we know we're that close to insolvency.
All right, Congressman Lankford, thanks so much for coming in. We really appreciate it. Hope you come back.